the position of the Labour front bench is still the same as the position of the government.
So let's be very clear about our language here. The people of Gaza are not starving. The people of Gaza are being starved. And does the Minister accept that there is no food shortage in the region? Does he accept that the reason that people are starving to death just 44 miles from Tel Aviv, the distance between Glasgow and Edinburgh, is as a direct result of the Israeli siege and their premeditated decision to cut off food supply?
We now come to the urgent question. I call the Shadow Secretary of State, David Lammy.
To ask the Secretary of State if he'll make a statement on the situation in Gaza and Israel.
Minister.
Can I thank the honourable gentleman for his urgent question? Mr. Speaker, Israel suffered the worst terrorist attack in its history on the 7th of October last year. The scenes we saw on that day were appalling, and Hamas's disregard for civilian welfare continues today, over 5 months later. We remember those all the time still being held hostage and their families, and we call once again for their immediate release. However, we of course remain deeply concerned about the humanitarian situation in Gaza and the impact of the conflict on all Palestinian civilians. We have borne witness, Mr. Speaker, to death and displacement on a vast scale. Over 1,700,000 people have had to leave their homes, many on multiple occasions. We are deeply concerned about the growing risk of famine, exacerbated by the spread of disease, and of course the terrible psychosocial impacts of the conflict that will be felt for years to come. We are totally committed to getting humanitarian aid to all the people in Gaza who desperately need it, either ourselves or through UN agencies and British or other charities. We and our partners are pushing to get aid in through all feasible means, by land, sea and air. We have trebled our aid funding to the OPTs this year, Mr. Speaker, providing just under £100 million, of which £70 million has been delivered as humanitarian assistance. 150 tonnes more of UK aid arrived in Gaza on the 13th of March, including 840 family tents, 13,440 blankets, almost 3,000 shelter kits and shelter fixing kits, 6,000 sleeping mats and more than 3,000 dignity kits. A field hospital provided by UK aid funding to UK Med arrived in Gaza from Manchester last Friday. This facility, staffed by UK and local medics, will be able to treat over 100 patients a day. Along with Cyprus, the US, UAE and others, Britain will help deliver humanitarian aid by sea to a new temporary US military pier in Gaza via a maritime corridor from Cyprus. But we have been clear that air and sea deliveries cannot substitute delivery of aid through land routes. Only through land routes can the volume of aid now be required to be met. We continue to press Israel to open more land crossings for longer and with fewer screening requirements. There is no doubt that land crossings are the most effective means of getting aid into Gaza, and Israel must do more. There is also no doubt that the best way to bring an end to the suffering is to agree an immediate humanitarian pause and progress towards a sustainable permanent ceasefire without a return to destruction, fighting and loss of life. Getting to this outcome is the focus of all our diplomatic efforts right now, Mr. Speaker, and a goal that is shared by our international partners. We urge all sides to seize the opportunity and continue negotiations to reach an agreement as soon as possible.
David Lammy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, a UN-backed report revealed the shocking reality that famine in Gaza is imminent. Half the population is expected to face catastrophic levels of hunger, the highest number of people ever recorded under this system. Only twice in 20 years have famine conditions been reached. But what distinguishes the horror in Gaza from what has come before is that this is not driven by drought or natural disaster, it is man-made. It is the consequences of war. It is the consequence of aid that is available not reaching those who need it. Food is piled up in trucks just a few kilometres away, while children in Gaza are starving. It's unbearable, and it must not go on. International law is clear. Israel has an obligation to ensure the provision of aid. The binding measures ordered by the ICJ require this. The world has demanded it for months, yet still aid flows are woefully inadequate. Aid actually fell by half between January and February. This is outrageous. The continued restrictions on aid flows are completely unacceptable. It must stop now. Just as Hamas must release the hostages now. I don't doubt that the Minister agrees with me, but will he have the courage to say that the ICJ's orders, including on aid, are binding, and that Israel must comply with them? And does the FCDO's lawyers believe Israel is in compliance currently with its obligations? Amid this accelerating hunger crisis, Prime Minister Netanyahu reportedly approved plans for an offensive against Rafah. This would risk catastrophic humanitarian consequences. It would be a disaster for civilians and a strategic mistake. How is the government working to prevent a further attack on Rafah? The truth is this: if it isn't possible to address the crisis in Gaza, it won't be possible to address the crisis in Gaza if the fighting doesn't stop. And that is also the best way to secure the release of hostages. So will the government finally now join with us and dozens of countries and call for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his questions and his comments, and let me try and deal with them more or less sequentially. First of all, he asked me about the reports of famine, and the IPC report is clear. It says, and I quote, "Famine is a very real scenario, and we are doing everything we can," as I set out in my first response, to try and head that off. There is also, in addition to famine, the danger of disease, the lack of health services, the acute danger from the lack of clean water and effective sanitation. So we are doing everything we can to head off the appalling circumstances which he set out. He asks me also about the number of trucks. I can tell him that on Sunday 192 trucks did get in, but that is woefully short of what is required. It is more than got in March, which averaged 165 so far, and in February it was only 97. But he will be well aware that before the crisis, more than 500 trucks a day were getting in. He asked me about the ICJ. As everyone in the House will know, the ICJ judgment is binding. And in respect of the offensive against Rafah, the Foreign Secretary and the Prime Minister, and indeed all our allies, have consistently warned that an offensive against Rafah at this time would have the most appalling humanitarian consequences. May I finish by taking the point that he made again about a ceasefire. As far as I'm aware, the position of the Labour front bench is still the same as the position of the government, that we are calling for an immediate pause so that we can get the hostages out. So, Mr. Speaker, that we can get the hostages out and aid in, followed, we hope, by a sustainable ceasefire. And it is that, Mr. Speaker, that we are working towards.
Chair of the Select Committee, Alicia Cairns.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I start by putting on record my gratitude for the Minister for Middle East, who made significant representations ahead of Ramadan to reduce tensions in Jerusalem and particular access to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which so far remains calm. The IPC report does make breathtakingly difficult reading, and the humanitarian situation is catastrophic. but it need not be. So can I ask that we please push harder on the Jordan land truck entry and make sure that is fully operationalised? And can my right honourable friend tell me when the House will be formally updated on whether Israel is demonstrating a commitment to international humanitarian law?
Well, I thank her for her comments, and I will pass on her comments about my colleague, Lord Ahmed, the Minister for the Middle East. In respect of international humanitarian law, we are going through the necessary legal processes, which are complex, but I can tell her that as soon as we are in a position to update the House on what we have set out clearly before, we will do so.
Spokesperson Brendan O'Hara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I take absolutely no satisfaction in saying that a month ago in this chamber I said that innocent people will die because of Israel's decision to prevent food getting to those who need it. So these reports of an imminent famine should surprise no one. We've all known that this deliberate man-made famine was coming. Yeah. I've just returned from Al Arish on the Egyptian-Gaza border with the Foreign Affairs Committee, where we saw hundreds and hundreds of lorry loads of food and aid waiting for permission to get into Gaza. So let's be very clear about our language here. The people of Gaza are not starving. The people of Gaza are being starved. And does the Minister accept that there is no food shortage in the region? Does he accept that the reason that people are starving to death just 44 miles from Tel Aviv, the distance between Glasgow and Edinburgh, is as a direct result of the Israeli siege and their premeditated decision to cut off food supplies? And does he also accept that starving a civilian population to death is a war crime? And finally, does he still believe that the UK is right, both legally and morally, to continue selling weapons to Israel?
Well, on his final point, Mr. Speaker, he is well aware of the arms sale regime that Britain adopts. And as I have said to him before from this dispatch box, it is the toughest anywhere in the world. I think, Mr. Speaker, the difference, if I may say so, between him and me is that he sees things as we would wish them to be, but we in government have to deal with them as they are. And that is why we are taking so many steps to try and achieve the release of the hostages and to get aid and support into Gaza. And to one point that he makes, where he is right, and it's a point also echoed by the Shadow Foreign Secretary, and it is this: the way to get aid into Gaza is by road and by truck. Of course, we are doing everything we can to explore every way, including the maritime route and dropping aid from the air. But at the end of the day, it is through road traffic, and that's one of the reasons why we are working so closely with Jordan to ensure that that route of aid in by road is enhanced. But at the end of the day, that is the right route to get aid in, and we are doing everything we can to try and make sure that it is pursued.